The ANC's policy conference is on its second day. They are currently deliberating in various commissions. We do know that ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa and former President of the country and former President of the ANC, Thabo Mbeki, are in the Economic Transformation Commission of the African National Congress, looking at the economic trajectory of the country. The economy is very sluggish. We're not seeing the growth in our economy as we would like it to be. The cost of living has gone high. The Reserve Bank has hiked the interest rates by 0.75 basis points. As you've also seen, the cost of borrowing has also gone up, as long as inflation as well. On the domestic part of politics, the ANC is a more divided and fractured organization, worse than it was in the 2017 54th National Conference. On international issues, you've seen the war between Russia and Ukraine. You are seeing the issues of the immigration laws being proposed by the ANC's Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, who's also the Minister of Home Affairs and Cooperation within the country. I'm going to bring in Sophie Mokoena to speak on the issues pertaining to international relations, the immigration laws being proposed by the ANC. You've also got our senior researcher with Maswal Ralibona within the SABC, and Tsopo Mungwai, who's also the econ editor, who's going to be deliberating on the economic issues facing the country and what the governing party is proposing. Sophie, issues pertaining to international relations. The president of the ANC at length trying to explain the implications that the war between Russia and Ukraine has on the South African economy, the high cost of living, particularly when it comes to fuel. You're looking at what is also currently unfolding within the African continent, SADC, the immigration proposals coming from Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi. What can we anticipate within the subcommittee commissions that are currently taking place and the proposals coming from Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi?
I think of interest in terms of the international relations document and the peace and security, particularly the international relations document. There's an extra document that speaks to South Africa's interest. I think that is the most important issue the conference will have to grapple with and come up with a clear proposals in terms of what needs to happen. When you talk about South Africa's interest, you know that when you look around the world, globally, the balance of forces are changing. The centers of power are changing. You look at the relationships in terms of both economically and politically are changing. And therefore, South Africa, as the second largest economy on the continent and the largest economy in the SADC region, will have to reposition itself, but also analyze and study these balance of forces that are changing and come up with a clear program to say, in terms of what we see currently, this is what South Africa is going to do, and this is how we are going to manage our interests. Because when you look at particularly issues related to trade, you know that we have strong relations with Asia, particularly China and Japan. But when you go to Europe, Europe is also our largest trading partner. America, as an independent country, is also one of our strategic trading partners. But politically, there might be a shift because of interest and the background. And therefore, you'll find that South Africa's interest will be more on the global south, to strengthen the global south, continue to strengthen country-to-country relations. And as you do that, you then say, what can be the risk for us achieving this? One issue will be socio-economic condition in the country, but also globally. The second issue will be the problem of unemployment, skills development, technology advancement, and also climate change. So when you do this assessment in terms of the risk, what are the factors that you can adopt or mitigating solutions to those risks?
Maswale, when you look particularly at the implementation of ANC policies to their subsequent conferences, dating it back to the Stellenbosch 2002 conference, when they were at the crosshairs with labor federations, COSATU, and other unions within the trade union movement on gear, for example, and you look at the fast forwarding of the various economic proposals that have come from the African National Congress, how far are they with the implementation of their policies, or have they just simply reached a ceiling?
Thank you, Samgele. I looked back at those policy documents or resolutions, because if we talk about the past, it's resolutions. Here we're talking about the documents. So when you check, for example, the NHI in 2007, and the NHI was also back in 2012. 2017, the NHI was also featuring. And then you ask yourself, what's the situation on the ground? 3 weeks ago, I spoke to the MEC of Health in Limpopo, Popira Matuba, and she gave me an example of an NHI hospitals in Limpopo, which is Siloam, Elim, and the other one. And the state of those hospitals is really not satisfying. They still have the infrastructure from the apartheid years. And she indicated that as the MEC of Health, she proposed to upgrade those hospitals in Limpopo. But she was told these hospitals are NHI hospitals, they are pilot hospitals, and they belong to the national government, and the national government will rebuild those hospitals. But the situation is not satisfying. The ANC also, in its proposals since 2007, they've been talking about building a state pharmaceutical company, of which even today there's not even I don't think there's a bill in Parliament to address that, whereas NHI is still a piloted situation in Limpopo, Eastern Cape, and other provinces. When you look at the issue of land, we know what happened last year when the EFF and ANC couldn't agree on certain clause on the bill that was presented in Parliament. Then the bill consequently failed to be passed in Parliament. So the issue of implementation of policies in the ANC, because when you look generally, ANC has got some of the best policies across the political parties, but implementation is where the problem is.
Mr. Mungai, when you look at the implementation of these policies, particularly now with the just transition from coal to renewable energy that is being proposed by President Cyril Ramaphosa, and the government has just addressed the nation in his cap as the head of state on South Africa's energy trajectory going forward, you've got younger leaders within the ANC, particularly provincial leaders, who are saying we cannot just abandon coal and go to renewable energy when we've got a lifespan of coal for a further 300 years. There's a resolution that says nationalization of mines, from the former ANC Youth League leaders who are now leading the ANC, who are saying we cannot just close these coal mines. You need to nationalize them. We need to continue with the base load of coal that we currently have. What can we anticipate, particularly within the ETC discussions, particularly pertaining to Eskom, which has a direct link to the economic trajectory and the recovery of our economy?
I think what is very clear, if you go back, you realize that, as Maswele indicated, the policy direction are pronounced and are very clear. Even the proposals are there. But one of the biggest challenge is people often say the ANC is a broad change, but the country is even a bigger church, if I may use that analogy, because you have a lot of vested interest. Firstly, once there is a proposal, it's taken to the executives. A certain department must actually formulate it into a bill. Consultation, you start to experience a lot of hurdles during the public consultations. Yes, and it may even take years before you move to where the bill can even be taken to the president. If you're lucky, it's signed by the president. You still have many other challenges with the implementation, because the government departments will still encounter a lot of court challenges. And eventually, what you have is a toned down objective of what initially was envisaged, or what was promised to the voters, and it doesn't achieve what initially it intended to do. So in many instances, you have the ANC promising people something, but what comes out is not exactly what they had promised them during the elections.
Memukwena, on this issue, particularly around the transition from coal to renewable energies, the exports from South Africa on coal, you've got Germany right now moving away from renewable energies, largely affected by the war between Russia and Ukraine, going back to coal. One of the biggest importers of South Africa's coal is one of the BRICS countries, China. Why the reversal from South Africa from coal to renewable energy? What could be the factors on the international balance of forces?
Well, when you look at the international balance of forces, we are BRICS members. BRICS member countries are clear. You cannot push us to abandon coal abruptly, because this is going to affect our economies. You know that we talk about the 7 industrialized nations. These nations, the industrialized nations, they were industrialized because they were using coal to have these huge industries. They have accumulated wealth, they have modernized their countries, they are filthy rich. Now us, the developing countries, developing South, we must do the same. We are not at the same level. That is why the African Union came up with one position to say, yes, we understand that we have to ensure that we prepare better for climate change and we come up with green energy solutions. But we, as developing countries, give us space to close the gap between yourselves and us before we can completely abandon that kind of source of energy. And therefore, the developing South is saying, just transition and on our own terms. Now, unfortunately, as we speak, because of the war in Ukraine, where Europe, that is relying on Russia for oil and gas, they are struggling right now because of the sanctions they've imposed on Russia. They need energy, and therefore they are looking to other regions such as your Gulf region and also the African continent. The current chair of the G7 came to South Africa, the Chancellor of Germany, to request supply for coal. You have China building more power stations and nuclear stations. You have Russia saying, don't allow the West to bully you. And therefore, we are caught in this tension. But the reality is, when you look at the young generation who are unemployed, who are activists, and some of the senior people who are involved in this industry, like Yogwede Mantashe, the Minister of Minerals and Energy, a former unionist, and who was working in the mines, is saying, if you do it abruptly, forget about Mpumalanga as it stands now. And therefore, you have to balance this tension that is simmering. But our president, of course, believes in the PPI.
Also, you raise a very important point of the president. He's a founding general secretary of the National Union of Mine Workers, whom were at some point the fastest growing union, particularly towards the end of the 80s, whom led that famous 1988 strike within the coal and the mining sector. Tsepo, when you look at the role of independent power producers, particularly within the private sector, and to bring in international politics, the President of the United States of America, Joe Biden, spoke about the Americans assisting South Africa in a just transition from coal to renewable energies. The political implications and economic implications of this in a geo-economic politics for South Africa.
Well, the policy is clear that a government does not have adequate resources to carry out some of these projects. So PPP, public-private partnership, is the way to go. But we must remember that the private sector will not just get involved in projects. They need incentive from government. Government must take the risk in order to lure the private sector to take part. And often when things don't work out, it's government that must actually bear the risk and the costs of such projects. I mean, we've seen during COVID, when some of the so-called user pay principles did not work because of the restrictions that were imposed, government had to pay a lot of money because of those risks, and government, those projects were not generating money. So the power generation, we are going to see a whole lot of private players entering that space is going to be very much competitive. The tariffs that we're seeing now have been increased, so there is some money that the private players can play. Eskom is likely to hold on to distribution, but then we also have a challenge where we find that many of the clients that Eskom rely on who pay these tariffs are now moving to other alternatives like solar. Now you have huge infrastructure in terms of distribution, huge lines, switch gears that cost a lot of money to maintain. And if those clients are not paying because now they are using other alternative, it's a problem. That's why in the past few weeks we've heard that there's going to be a flat tariff of 900 Rand that's going to be imposed on those who are using solar. But it's very clear that it might not be 900, but there must be some money that it's paid so that there is money to maintain that infrastructure. Because whether you have 10 million clients or 100,000 clients, the cost of maintaining that infrastructure, it's still there. So that's the space that Eskom wants to keep, but the developments around getting the private players, I think with what the president has announced, we are definitely going to get a lot of players. What is not clear is whether there will be a lot of black participants who are partnering with big companies. It's still not very clear in terms of who can enter. I mean, I've seen a lot of former Eskom employees who've positioned themselves from these opportunities, and I suppose they understand them better, but there's still more that needs to be clarified from that front.
Interestingly, one of the players within the renewable energy space who owns one of the biggest mineral resources energy companies in the country, Patrice Motsepe, is part of the delegation who's here. I saw him seated in front, who is also the brother-in-law of President Ramaphosa and the former minister of in government, Jeff Radebe, whom they've denied any nepotism in their involvement within IPPs. But Maswale, from a research perspective, is it not dangerous for a country to surrender its energy security and energy generation to the hands of the private sector?
I think we are going to have a problem going forward, Samkele. As we speak now, you and I can't really understand what is happening with our units that we buy as electricity. And we know how when things like this, energy, is at the hands of the private sector, what can happen to you and I. We are likely to find ourselves not being able to afford to put the lights on in our homes. I'm personally worried that the country as it is, South Africa as it is, and the privatization that we've seen taking place since the beginning of 2019. You can talk about SAA, and now there's too much talk of privatization in Eskom, of which even these IPPs privatization, it means Eskom is slowly but surely going private, which is going to be a problem to you and I, who are what you call it, middle class in this country. For energy-wise, we are in danger.
I'll let you have the last bite. Sophie, the pushback against renewal, the pushback against the influence of the capitalist class, the private sector in this current administration. Can the president of the ANC find himself on the back foot when closing this policy?
It was expected. If you look back at the 2017 national conference, when you look at the documents in terms of plenary and commissions, they were very radical. Yes, of course, when they were communicated to us media, there was an attempt to tone down those documents. And clearly at that time, it was clear it was going to be difficult for the ANC in government to implement some of the radical policies the party had adopted, because at that time, how was the mood? Even now at this conference, you have a different mood. People are pushing back. They want answers why you didn't implement ABCD, and not only ANC members who believe in this radical transformation, but also your alliance partners like your COSATU, your SACP. You had the General Secretary of the SACP when she was speaking, Soli Mabaila. It was like she was delivering a keynote address in terms of very short but precise. What is this? Why this? And therefore, I think there in the commissions, the battle is on. And I'm not surprised that President Ramaphosa, the former president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, and the former president of the ANC are in the Economic Transformation Commission, because that is the most critical battle where you have this battle. And I think I'm not surprised to hear from the delegates of the record or whispering to us that, yeah, we are really pushing back. And some will push back in terms of the organizational renewal, because it will affect certain individuals. You know, we have characters in the ANC. I don't even want to go there, but it was expected. So let's see what happens tomorrow.
Colleagues, thank you very much for the discussion, and all of us are going to have our ears on the ground, particularly when it pertains to these commissions currently taking place. The president of the ANC, as Ms. Sophie has correctly pointed out, is in the Economic Transformation Commission with former President Mbeki. You know former President Mbeki when it comes to economics and the economic trajectory of the country. He's been on that particular point since he became the deputy president of the African National Congress, at some point even taking charge of the country as former President late Nelson Mandela was waning and winding down his responsibilities as the head of state. We do know that the younger generation of the ANC, former ANC Youth League leaders like Siboniso Duma, Bheki Mtolo, Oscar Maboyane in the Eastern Cape, Zamani Sol within the Northern Cape, David Makura as well, and Panyaza Lesufi, now the chair of Gauteng, Lebogang Maile, Zwandile Masina. Those leaders want the full implementation of the 54th National Conference resolutions going back to the ANC Youth League days of economic freedom in their lifetime, nationalization of mines. They are unflinching when it comes to the issue of land expropriation without compensation. Bheki Mtolo being explicit to say the EFF turned their backs on the ANC because the ANC had a watered down resolution which was land expropriation with nil compensation, which did not enjoy majority support in the National Assembly. So the battle now moves to the commissions. It's not only ETC that's the main bone of contention and Eskom Energy, but the organizational restructure of the ANC. The step-aside resolution in the afternoon from 5 o'clock will be the bone of contention. Back to you in studio.
Samgele Masego there from Nasrec, of course, giving us that comprehensive panel discussion out of the happenings there in Nasrec. Thanks very much indeed for that.